Well, welcome to another edition of the After Hours podcast. Andy Lindahl, Andrew Mason, my man Andrew Mason.
I miss you, man.
I know, the horsing around. I don't know what to do sometimes. I've sat here, the schedule comes out. That was weird yesterday. I haven't had really my free agent outlet. It's all been strange.
That was actually what made me kind of sad for you, feel a lot of empathy when you put that out there on Twitter about the schedule. And, you know, in years past, the schedule comes out, you were planning your fall around it. And, man, that's tough. And I really... Dude, I miss you.
Trust me, and for those that don't know, you know, I think most people know the group of characters that hang out with me on the podcast. But Andrew Mason, of course, of Orange and Blue 760, DenverBroncos.com. We did the Horsing Around podcast forever, and assuming that I don't sign with the wrong entity, we'll try to do it again in the future. However, there are contractual, although I don't know. Some things may happen where I could still do the podcast with Andrew Mason at some point. It's a wacky business. Who knows? Yeah, I don't. You know what? Honestly, so, and you'll get this because I've had a lot of people reach out to me, and I wasn't trying to make anybody sad. I kind of felt bad about that. I just said, man, it's just really weird to think I don't need to, plan every weekend, like you said, around what's a home game, what's a road game, and all that. I will tell you my one disappointment, the one stadium, and you can probably guess it of where they're going this year. The one venue that I wanted to visit before my career was up was Green Bay.
Yeah.
And so I'm disappointed I won't go there as a member of the broadcast
And
group.
that is by far and away the game that excites me most on the schedule is going to Lambeau. And, yeah, I've been before. I've been in 2003. I've been in 2011. Actually went in 2008 when I was covering the Panthers, and that was a classic Lambeau Field game. It was Aaron Rodgers' first season as starter. He played well. The Packers lost. Steve Smith had some big catches. DeAngelo Williams had, I think, 3 touchdowns for Carolina, 35-31. But the thing that made it classic Lambeau Field, late season, it was Thanksgiving weekend. The skies were gray throughout the day. Near the end of the game, the heavens opened up and snow came down. So the last few minutes were played in a snowstorm. And by the time our plane is ready to leave Austin Straubel Airport in Green Bay, we're in the middle of a snowstorm. And basically, I think we were the last flight out that night before they closed up operations. But getting to experience Lambeau Field, at least for part of the game, in the snow, man, it just felt right. Picture perfect football. It is, to me, the one stadium in the NFL that is a bucket list stop. I'm not even going to say that Dallas, AT&T Stadium, with all the bells and whistles, Jerry World, that's nice. But if you're a football enthusiast, you care about the game, the history of it, you've got to find a way to get to Lambeau Field. And I think somehow, some way, it's not going to be like the Broncos in Arizona, but a decent amount of orange-clad fans will find their way into Lambeau Field, getting their tickets on the secondary market through travel agencies, whatever, knowing that this is a place I've got to get to as a football fan before I die. And, man, it's tremendous. Of course, I have to also add the caveat here. I am a Green Bay Packers shareholder. In one of their many offerings when they need money for some capital improvements, I think this was several years ago, and this is when they built the new suites, new scoreboard, all sorts of stuff. Need some improvements, and they went back and did another share offering, and my wife and I have a share of the Green Bay Packers. It's actually in a frame in our basement, so, I'm an advocate for Packerdom.
See, that's awesome. I think those that have listened to me a while know the drill, for those that are maybe new to the podcast. So I grew up, I'm a Bronco fan, Denver native, grew up here in town, all that kind of stuff, but I had roommates, as Andrew knows, in college. Now, that's the jalapeno ketchup. We're hanging out here at Juicy Burger and Dog off Arapahoe and Yosemite. You got to come check it out. Our guy, Paul Talbot, loved the cheeseburger. Andrew's about to have a nice experience here with some of the burgers. He's having some of the tots. I've got their beer battered onion rings. Swing on by and have some stuff. And onion rings and Wisconsin, it all goes together. I had these roommates from Wisconsin, and this was, this is the mid-'90s, late 90s when I was living with these guys going to college. The other one's the regular ketchup, by the way.
I like the jalapeno, man.
You're not afraid.
It's red gold ketchup, the official ketchup of the Indianapolis Colts. It's the
Honestly,
I've never had it before.
This is my man Andrew's willing to try a lot. I still haven't got you to try the tarantula burger that was in that weird. Where was that? North Carolina or something?
It's in Durham, North Carolina. First of all, I've got to find a way to get back to that part of North Carolina, and it's actually been 4 or 5 years since I've been to the Triangle. And given how many relatives I have there, probably far too long. I need to get back to that part of the state. Usually I'm up in Asheville when I visit. But, yeah, I got to find a way to get there and have the tarantula burger just to do it once. But
maybe not finish it, but take a bite or two.
yeah, I don't know if I have the appetite to get through it. And it's possible that this is the one thing I could look at on my plate and just say, no. And maybe I'll order the tarantula burger and take the tarantula off.
Yeah,
Give me a tarantula burger, hold the tarantula.
For those that don't know, there's some exotic meat place, and we found this last year on Orange and Blue, that does an actual tarantula burger with a real fried tarantula on there, and it still looks like a tarantula, and it's disgusting.
And the thing is, they only have it at certain times of the year.
Yeah, thank God.
Apparently, there's a season for tarantula harvesting.
Yeah. Mine is a season in hell. There's no way I would even try it. I'd want a picture of it, but that, like, you got to order ahead so they can prepare it. But anyway.
Bull City Burger and Brewery, by the way, is the name of the place. If you're in Durham, they do it as part of Exotic Meat Month.
Well, you can have your exotic. I'll stick with Juicy Burger and Dog, but
That's good enough for today.
anyway, you know what? I had roommates that were Green Bay Packer fans. And in the 90s, before the Sunday Ticket and all that stuff, we would watch the Fox game in the morning and then the Broncos game in the afternoon. The Fox game was usually a Packer game because it was usually the Packers, Cowboys, or Niners. But more often than not, this was Brett Favre's heyday. This was leading up to the Broncos and Packers meeting in the Super Bowl. So I got it. I just kind of became a fan of the Packers. And I'm sorry, Andrew. And by the way, if you need more, there's a bigger one behind you.
I'm good.
We always eat during the podcast, or we're drinking strain hands.
Excuse us.
Yeah, you may need to come by for a strain hands one later on in the year. But
I do.
Look, I love watching Aaron Rodgers. And, I think, I don't know that we're all in love with his personality and some of the stuff coming out as of late. But nonetheless, I still love watching the guy play quarterback. So I just wish I could go there. To your point, I think it's cool that you own the stock. And I think if you're a true fan of the NFL, you appreciate the original venues. You know me. You're going to have to put a hot poker on my backside to get me to say something nice about the Kansas City Chiefs. But it was cool to go and see Arrowhead, where so many historic games have been played. And I do think the NFL, for as much as I love and marvel at their new buildings, I mean, we just saw the Mercedes-Benz Dome, whatever it's called out there in Atlanta
yeah.
for the Super Bowl. Those are really cool, but there is something to me anyway. Like Chicago. I was excited to go to Chicago, but I wish now I could have seen the original Soldier Field, not whatever that thing is.
I actually was at the last game before they redid it. It was a playoff game, January of 2002, between the Eagles and Bears. And no one in Chicago expected that team to be a playoff team. That was a shock 13-3 run fueled by special teams, defense. Their quarterbacks that year, as I recall, were Jim Miller and Shane Matthews. It is the biggest outlier of a 13-3 season, in my opinion, in modern NFL history. Well, Chicago, in no way, shape, or form, was expecting a playoff run from these Bears because the timeline for renovating Soldier Field in order to make sure the Bears were only out of the place for one regular season, which they played down in Champaign, they had to start that thing literally at the end of the 2001 season. But the Bears make the playoffs, and that pushed it back. So the Eagles come in. They beat the Bears handily in that game. I go down. I'm working for NFL.com at the time, and so I'm covering the winning team. So I go down into the Philly locker room in the bowels of Soldier Field, and then I take the elevator back up to the press box. And by the way, for the playoffs, because the press box was so small, they actually had trailers on stilts that were situated behind the stands and kind of and above the stands, like because it only went up one level. And they were connected via a walkway to the press box. So if the wind blew off Lake Michigan, you could actually feel the press trailer moving a bit. That was very unsettling. But I get back up, and I start, and I go back to add quotes to my story and finish it all up. And I look down as I sit down, and this is probably about 50 minutes after the game. You get back up to the press box after you've been in the locker room, and they are literally taking out seats already because they were 2 weeks behind because the Bears had made the playoffs and they were on such a tight schedule that they had to take it out. So that was my experience. I was there for the last game at what was old Soldier Field, the old design of Soldier Field. It was a cool place to visit. That being said, it was not a good NFL stadium.
Sure. Well, neither was real. You know what? I'm about to get a lot of people mad at me. Mile High had its issues too.
But at least at Mile High, most of the seats were on the sidelines.
Right.
At Soldier Field, if you looked at it, they had to do some work to kind of turn it into a real functional football stadium. They had to kind of rebuild one end, cut it off, etc. And the end zone stands, they just kind of went back and back and back. And there were some seats up in the end zone as you got up there in the corners behind the goalposts that the angle on it, you were set back, and they were not good seats at all. There was because it was all open air, there was no protection from the wind. It was an uncomfortable stadium in which to watch a football game.
Still cool to say you were there, though, right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I would think that one, what was it, the Star in Dallas there for a while?
Texas
in Irving,
Stadium.
Texas Stadium, thank you.
That was a stadium, the first time I went to it, it was in 2005, Broncos, Cowboys on Thanksgiving. That was a stadium that when I walked into it, it felt big. But at the same time, you see it on television, Old Texas Stadium, and on TV it glittered. It looked phenomenal. And then you get there, and you start seeing how the paint's peeling, that sort of thing, and I'm like, this place is actually a little bit of a dump. It was 35 years old by then, or in its 35th season, but that's when I walked around, I'm like, it looks great on television, but man, being in it, this place is past its prime.
Well, I still would have liked to visit. I drove by it on the outside once, but I still would have liked to have visited just to say it was one of the great NFL venues where important games are played, so on and so forth. But you're right.
You know where my first NFL game was, by the way, that I attended as a fan? RFK Stadium. I was 10 years old in Washington.
Really?
What an atmosphere.
I thought you were going to say, what a dump.
No. Yeah, was it a dump? Yes, it was. But I was 10. I didn't know the difference. To me, it was the Taj Mahal and Buckingham Palace all rolled into one. It was magical to walk in there. I've been watching Redskins games in Virginia before we moved to Florida, so that was the team I saw every Sunday. And seeing it in person, you know the scene in City Slickers when Billy Crystal talks about going to Yankee Stadium for the first time and how it's just so vivid, it's in color, and the magic of that day, you're going with your dad. Well, that's what going to RFK Stadium for the first time was for me. So even though I look back and say, yeah, it was not a great facility, to me at that moment, it felt like everything a stadium could be. I can still recall the stadium swaying and the stands shaking when they played Hail to the Redskins after a touchdown, and all the fans are stomping and clapping and singing along. Man, I get goosebumps thinking about it. But now I fast forward to today when the Redskins are in a terrible stadium, FedEx Field in Landover. It's in the middle of a parking lot. There's no character to it. The fan base is turned on the team.
And the owner mainly, right?
Yeah, that can happen over time. It tells you. Washington was basically Denver East in terms of loyalty, fervor, love of the club. The Bronco fan base and the Washington fan base for decades had a lot in common. What we've seen the last couple of decades is because of the ownership issue, mismanagement, poor decisions, poor on-field play, get the perception of gouging the customers. What was once one of the best fan bases in the league has withered away and shriveled. You got to be careful. Nothing is guaranteed to last, and that's why I look at the Broncos and say, hey, they're in a pretty critical juncture right now as a franchise and need to get things kind of rolling in the right direction again. I think Vic Fangio has the ability to do that, but it if you're not careful, if you don't nurture it and support it and let it flourish, man, what happened in Washington, I don't think it'll happen here, but it could. So you got some work to do.
You know what? There's a couple points I want to make about that, because especially what happens when you go south, it's mainly because of quarterback play. And I want to get into Joe Flacco. You and I have not had a chance to discuss that at all since he got to town. But before I get there, Green Bay, real quickly on the schedule. You and I, the last 3 or 4 years, have been breaking down the schedule. Yeah. Green Bay, the best road trip. I know you've kind of already hinted at that. Is that the best road trip?
It's the best road trip. I mean, if you want to go to L.A., great, but that's going to be there every year, as Andy offers me an onion ring, because I didn't have breakfast, I'm starving, and I just inhaled
I know.
my
We were
tots.
going to eat. I said we got to record first.
Yeah, that's fine. We're multitasking.
Yeah.
We always do.
Yeah. So Green Bay is the best trip.
Green Bay is the best trip as far as the ones that don't recur every year. There may be some Bronco fans who want to go for the last trip to Oakland, now that we know that last year's trip was not the final one. The on Broncos Raiders in Oakland will be Monday Night Football, Week 1, that late game. So there may be some Bronco fans that want to go experience that. I'm not sure I recommend it.
Right.
But at least the weather should be kind. It'll be played on a dirt infield. That's not exactly an attribute for it, but it shouldn't make a difference in terms of watching it. The underrated trip on there, and it's because of the time of year, is Houston in December. The weather there should be pretty nice. There's some things you can check out. You know, obviously Johnson Space Center. You know, you maybe drive down to the beach down to Galveston for a day.
Stay in Galveston. That would be my recommendation.
Stay in
Galveston. Hit up there for game day.
If you're a golfer, there are plenty of terrific courses in the area to play. Some good restaurants in the city. I mean, it's like any other big city. There's a lot of good flavor to it. Maybe the Rockets are going to be in town. If they are, catch a Rockets game that weekend. But, that's the time of year where Denver can start getting a little bit chilly and nasty, and an escape to Texas, escape to Houston when the weather is usually very kind. I think we went down there in 2013 when Peyton Manning broke the touchdown record.
Roof was open, right?
No, it was closed.
Okay.
They tend to close it at almost any circumstance. I think the weather that day was 64 degrees, and they decided, okay, let's close it. It's a little cool. But it was a trip because it was an early game. It was a trip that we went down on Friday, so we had a day to kill. And it was in the 70s on Friday and Saturday. I remember walking around the city in shorts, and that's why Houston might be a welcome trip.
Kind of like the San Diego of 2015, if you remember.
Yeah.
When it was just the perfect time for all of us to take a break from the cold weather, especially after a Chicago trip that year. As I look at the schedule, and I do want to talk about some of the moves, and the Broncos just made a couple more minor ones, I guess I'll say. They signed a cornerback and an offensive lineman, according to Mike Kliss. They let go of a veteran corner today. We'll talk a little bit about that. But you and I are always real big on the schedule. Now, I'm not going to ask you for any kind of predictions and so on and so forth right now, because we got to figure out what the Broncos are. I can't tell you, Andrew, that I've got my hands quite around what I think the Broncos are. I think I'm expecting with the veteran coaching staff and the quarterback move and some of the moves that they've made that this is a team that's going to battle for the typical 8-8 to 10-6, depending on how good you feel about things, but taking more of a wait-and-see approach with this thing. I'm glad they're finally opening on the road, because you and I think, thought they may open on the road last year, right? They've had a good streak of opening at home.
And I'm not surprised that they got the late game for Monday Night Football on ESPN, although it's interesting. They have a Thursday night game. I think everybody but Buffalo has a Thursday night game this year. Buffalo is the only team without a primetime game.
I thought everybody had to play it.
So did I. Buffalo has no primetime games this year.
Really?
Yeah.
No idea why, huh?
Market size, not coming off a good season.
Too cold to put a Thursday night, they could play a road opponent, I suppose. But
I thought they'd merit, because it's a lively atmosphere, I thought they'd merit a Thursday night game against, I don't know, give them New England on Thursday at home. When they played New England at home on Monday last year, it was a competitive game.
Right.
Until the very end. Buffalo, with a downright heroic defensive performance, staying in that game despite getting bupkis on the offensive side, bupkis from the quarterback position. But to go back to the Broncos, they have 2 primetime appearances, which is very low for them. no Sunday night football games. They have only one Monday night game. Last year they had 2 Monday night games. And the Monday night game they do have is that late night, 8:20 p.m. Mountain Time, 10:20 on the East Coast game.
That nobody out there watches.
Right, that half the country is asleep for. So it's a reminder of right now where the Broncos stand in the grand scheme of things league-wide. When you've gone 11-21 in the previous 2 years, there's not a lot of national excitement that's going to exist about what you're doing. I think job one is to try to change that, at least get the Broncos back in a place where they're regarded as at least a contender for the playoffs.
See, I would agree with that. Now, again, just looking at the schedule, I like the Week 10 bye. They get a couple. I like how everything's kind of home or away, home, away, home.
I do not like the 4 out of 5 on the road after the bye, though.
Is there one of the – oh, my gosh, you're right. It happens again. Why does that happen every year?
Okay.
Why does the NFL do that to them?
All right.
This is like the 3rd or 4th year after the bye they have something like that.
I am actually really glad I brought my laptop with me here because I was doing research for the schedule show that we had on Orange and Blue 760 Wednesday night. And by the way, you can go to denverbroncos.com, the Broncos audio zone. If you subscribe to our podcast, that's wonderful. Please do. We appreciate it. If not, you can go to denverbroncos.com/audio and find our schedule show. It's a 2-hour breakdown that Ryan Edwards and I had on air. We had Dave Logan, Rick Lewis, Benjamin Albright, Will Parks, Mike Kliss, all joining us to help break it down. And Steve Atwater. How can I forget my main man Steve? And Brandon Cristal as well. And anyway, I was doing research because I had an idea what the schedule would be. But here's the interesting thing about that 4 road games out of 5. Last year, the Broncos did not have that. But it's something that's become a common thing. Since 2010, this is the 8th time in 10 years that the Broncos have had a stretch of 4 road games in 5 weeks. Now, in a couple of cases, it included 3 games in a row on the road. They only had one such stretch, 4 out of 5 on the road, from 98 to 09. Here's what's happened. There are things that the league used to consider in schedule making that they tried to avoid. They didn't want to send a team on the road 3 weeks in a row. They did not want a team to have 4 out of 5 on the road. Now there is less consideration of these factors than in the past. So you have something like that. You have the Raiders and Bucks that literally play 5 consecutive games away from home this year. One of the games is a quote-unquote home game in London. But the Bucks go from mid-September until early November without playing at home at Raymond James Stadium. The Raiders have a similar stretch in the first half of the season. Like the Raiders, they have to look at the Bronco game in Week 1 as not merely a must-win, maybe an absolute win, because 2 weeks later, they start this odyssey. The other thing that's interesting with the Raiders, Andy, they play 7 games at 10 a.m. Pacific time this year. A West Coast team playing 7 games at 10 a.m. Pacific,
brutal.
1 p.m. Eastern. That's brutal. I have never in my life seen anything like that.
Well, you know what? The schedules, I will say this, the schedules are always interesting because, you know, we're going off last year's results this time of year. When it comes to the Broncos, I like the Flacco signing. I've liked the trade. I've had no problem with it. It's the fact there's no guaranteed money there. I did think he had an interesting answer, although it was an unsurprising answer when asked if the Broncos were to take someone at 10 and how he just kind of played the politically correct line, but you could tell he didn't. I don't really think you should take a quarterback.
Well, he
at
said
10.
if they pick a guy, it's with the understanding that Joe Flacco is the quarterback.
Yeah, right. I'm not giving up the job yet. Now, look, I'll say it. I'm a Dwayne Haskins guy of this class. Frankly, I know I would rather they wait till next year. I would just rather you grab one of those kids coming out in the first round. To me, it's not a must-have. Grab a tight end, grab a linebacker, do something for this year.
There is something about Haskins, though.
Oh, no, I agree with you. If he gets to 10, I don't think you have a choice.
It's not just the short to intermediate accuracy, which is pinpoint. And we talk about a lot of things that you have to succeed in, whether it's the Kubiak-Shanahan offense or a descendant thereof. I would refer to what the Broncos are putting in as probably Kubiak/Shanahan version 3.0.
Right. The upgrade.
Yes. But you do have to have some mobility, but you don't have to be a sprinter. Dwayne Haskins, the 40 time, it's not gonna blow your skirt up, basically. But if you watch him in the pocket when he's eluding defenders, he's got a little kind of shuffle step. He can step up, he can step back. It's kind of Roethlisberger-esque. He can run the play-action boot to throw. He'd prefer to stay in the pocket. But the thing you need to have in this offense, I think more than anything, is the ability to get into a rhythm with those short to intermediate passes and be pinpoint and not miss those. And that's where Dwayne Haskins jumps out to me as somebody who I think could run this scheme very well at the next level. Could maybe even, after he developed, have a Matt Ryan 2016-like season in this offense.
See, as Jeff Legwald said it to me, that release of his is easy cheese, too.
Yes.
It's just so
relaxed.
You know what I loved about him at Pro Day? He got done, and he looked at his guy, and he was like, all right, what else do they want to see? It wasn't, hey, what more do we have left of the script? It was, what do you need to see? I'll throw it for you. I don't care.
And he emphasized going deep and outside because that was the thing he did not do a lot of at Ohio State. So they put a heavy emphasis on that at Pro Day. And, look, I know it's against air.
Yeah.
But he does have the ability to make those throws. It didn't surprise me because watching the way he threw the ball, like Jeff Legwald said, it's an easy motion. He's not forcing it. But Case Keenum, with all respect to him, it felt like he was pushing it and forcing it to get it where it needed to go. You don't see that with Dwayne Haskins. And because of that, even when watching the Ohio State film and seeing very few deep and outside shots, I thought, okay, the arm talent is there to where I believe if he's asked to do that, he'll have that in his drawer. It's something he'll have to work on over time. And I think, actually, if the Broncos pick Dwayne Haskins, it'll be a perfect scenario because he needs a year to sit and learn.
Maybe a couple.
Grow.
You know, he was a one-year starter.
One-year starter,
That's
exactly.
the one thing that makes us nervous as draft guys. I don't always love the one-year starter.
You don't want to rush that guy onto the field. We saw Mitchell Trubisky have some issues that first year he was in for Chicago, and he only had 1 year starting at North Carolina. And in terms of experience, that's kind of the comp, is Trubisky. There are different styles of quarterback. I actually think Dwayne Haskins, if he flourishes, there's some Roethlisberger in him. Another comparison I've heard from our friend Benjamin Albright is that he's Jameis Winston without the issues.
Well, and there was plenty of talent there, we know, for Jameis
No
coming
doubt
out.
about that. With Jameis Winston, it's not been a question of whether he's talented enough in terms of the arm. It's not been a question of whether he has the football IQ. It's always been about character and decision-making. And Dwayne Haskins appears to be a very high-character quarterback. We talked with him down at the Super Bowl in Atlanta. A very respectful young man. Kind of digging deep, heard nothing but raves about the kind of leader he is, the kind of person he is from people around the Ohio State program. If he's there at 10...
You have to. I'm sorry, you have to.
You, at the very least, whatever your plan is, you have to think long and hard about tearing it up. And the thing that, if you're the Broncos, you have to understand when you're making this decision is this fact. No matter what you pick this year, you are not going to fill in every hole on this roster in this draft. You're still another draft away. So you're going to emerge from the 2019 draft, no matter who you pick, with some holes that you're still going to want to fill a year from now in your long-range planning. And why I think of that, Andy, is this. If you like Dwayne Haskins, and you expect, and I think there's an expectation in that building, this team can be back in the playoffs this year. There's a lot of confidence there in what Vic Fangio is doing, what he can bring on defense, and even the talent they have on offense. Vic Fangio said down at the NFL owners' meetings when he has coaches' breakfast, he said that he thought the talent on offense was better than people realized. So if you can get this offense to an average level, if you can improve the defense and get it back in the top 5, top 10, that's a team that all of a sudden looks like it can win 9 or 10 games, and that's what I have the Broncos winning right now on my first projection of the season, being in that 9 or 10 win range. And if you do that, then you're picking 21st, 22nd, 23rd, and then you have to sacrifice a future one to get up and pick a quarterback. Whereas this year, if you like Dwayne Haskins and he's sitting there at 10, you don't have to sacrifice any future draft capital. So it would be a move that had some long-range thought to it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out because, again, look, I'm hoping, as John Elway has said, I think we're all hoping. Hopefully you can, at minimum, have another kind of 5-year run with Flacco the way you did with Manning. I don't think that's so out of the question. The guy, I don't know, most people aren't counting on it. But it's not like Look, I'm happier. I'm more intrigued and excited to watch Flacco than I was Keenum. You know how I felt about Keenum. I like Case Keenum, the guy. I had said it on our podcast last year. All you did was it was the same skill set in a different package. There was a little more personality to Case Keenum. There was a little more, hey, guys, you better listen to him. But he and Trevor Siemian were the same guy. They were the same guy. It was the same skill set.
And roughly the same production level when all was said and done.
And you paid
a lot more money.
Yeah, way too much money for him. But I think Flacco's got a bigger upside to this thing, could have a bigger upside. Now, I don't know if it's going to work out that way. If you don't fix the offensive line, it really doesn't matter. We can go and bang that drum all we want to. It's going to look the way that it did.
And that's where I think Vic Fangio has more confidence than most people have, is on the offensive line. I think they're still figuring some things out. But when he talks about this team being better than a lot of people think in terms of the talent that he inherits and pointing to the offense specifically, I think he's looking at the line. I think, first of all, he's got Mike Munchak. Munchak should be able to walk in, do his job, and make everybody better. He did that in Pittsburgh, where he took an offensive line protecting Ben Roethlisberger that was second worst for a decade in sack rate, and over the last 5 years became the league's second best with the same quarterback. So where's the improvement happening? It's on the offensive line. Sam Jones is a guy that we all know about, being from Highlands Ranch. Broncos picked him in the 6th round last year. That's a player I think they have more confidence in than people outside do. I think they're expecting Sam Jones to take some big steps, maybe even be in the starting lineup, or at least be that swing back up on the interior. Connor McGovern, they want to see a little more from him. Look, it would help out tremendously if Ron Leary's healthy, but the jury is going to be out on that for a little while. But if you get him back in there, you've got you've got left guard covered and set. And then the most important thing, I think, is probably what you get out of Garrett Bowles, the job that Mike Munchak does with Garrett Bowles. Because if Munchak does well, then Garrett Bowles becomes a guy you're talking about re-signing in a couple of years and could end up being an 8 to 10 year left tackle. If Garrett Bowles can't respond to the teaching, then you might be shopping for left tackle in next year's draft.
I agree.
Soon. The other thing is I expect to see an interior offensive lineman drafted early, first 3 rounds. I'd be shocked if there's not an O lineman in rounds 1, 2, or 3 from the Broncos, and someone who can push to start right away. Dalton Reisner, who can also play tackle.
Love that name.
Oh, boy. No one I've met in the pre-draft process in all my years covering the draft, and I've covered the Broncos for now. This is going into my, oh, goodness gracious, my 16th season covering the Broncos. And in 15 of those, I've been to the Combine or been to the Senior Bowl and talked to prospects. And, Andy, I have never met a prospect that was so excited and so truly desired to be a Denver Bronco above all else than Dalton Reisner.
Well, I hope it works out for the kid.
And he's a good player. The thing is, he's a very good player, and he's got a lot of potential, and I think he could fit with what Mike Munchak wants to do. He's athletic, he's smart, tenacious, versatile, checks off all the boxes character-wise.
Look, and here's the thing. They've got to get some things figured out in the middle of the offensive line. I like Connor McGovern, but I like him better as a guard than I do as center.
Don't forget he's in the last year of his contract.
Well, and here's the other thing. As much as we're all worried about Garrett Bowles, and I think you're right, if he doesn't play better, they'll be looking for a new left tackle, and maybe they draft a candidate or two in the mid-round somewhere this year. But you better have a backup. Another reason why I like Reisner, you better have a backup plan for Ron Leary. Because Ron Leary is still in the – and look, I like Ron Leary, the player. I like everything he brings, but he's much like Luis Vasquez. He's hurt now. He's not the player you signed. He wasn't the guy that you wanted to give the contract to. There's knee concerns and so on and so forth, his back, all that sort of stuff. You can't rely on him making it through this entire season.
You're trying to get one more year out of him, I think.
He wouldn't be on the roster if he wasn't injured. Would you not agree with that?
Well, yeah, because the injury guarantee.
Right. That's why he's still here. That's the only reason why he's still here. I think they just roll – and I hate saying that because I really like Ron, but I think that's part of the reason why they're rolling the dice with him.
Yeah.
So, all right. Real quickly, as we get ready to wrap up, our guy Paul is sitting down.
Andrew. Good
Paul,
to meet you,
Andrew. Real quickly, are you comfortable telling everybody your prediction for the pick a week from, Thursday? Week from today as we sit? Or do you need to – are we going to tease it for next week?
I'm going to tease it for next week because my final mock draft will begin Monday on First and 10 on Orange and Blue 760 with Ryan Edwards and the legendary Steve Atwater.
Offensive or defensive? How about we get that out of you? Do you know which way you're leaning?
I'm leaning offense.
Really?
Leaning offense.
Very intriguing.
Trade down is a distinct possibility, though.
If you get a 1 next year and trade down this year, I'm all for it.
I actually think when it comes down to it, talking to fans, getting feedback on social media, I think when it comes down to it, most Bronco fans would be happy getting an extra 1 and moving down anywhere from 8 to 15 picks in round 1. Now, if you move down 15 picks, if you're moving into the mid-20s, then you could be talking about picking up another 2 this year, which also has value as well because this draft, it looks pretty good for me from about 20 to 60 or even 70, that there's a jumble of players there and a lot of talent. Some of that talent is going to bleed all the way down into round 3. I mean, you could take a guy like Andy Isabella, receiver I like out of UMass. Terry McLaurin, receiver from Ohio State, another high-character guy, prolific, 4.35 speed. Some of these interior offensive linemen, Michael Dieter out of Wisconsin, Chris Lindstrom from Boston College, Eric McCoy from Texas A&M. The depth on the defensive line, my goodness, it's tremendous. There's going to be some quality that slips down to round 2 and round 3, the top of round 3. So picking up some extra picks and picking up a 1 next year, that might be tempting for the Broncos in terms of getting the value they need out of this draft.
All right, well, we want to remind everybody, stop by Juicy Burger and Dog, as Paul just did. Paul's been in here. Paul wants you to come by, say hello. He's having a pretty active lunch here today on this Thursday. I appreciate you jumping in. We'll have to get you on maybe in a month or so after all this is meted out. You've seen a camp or two.
Can't wait.
All right. You know what? We're going to get Mark Stout and Jason Hirsch on soon, too, to talk a little of this Rockies start. And Andrew is a Braves fan, so he enjoyed part of the start the Rockies had.
Well, you know what? The Braves have a list of problems that's growing. They don't have a bullpen at this point. Arodys Vizcaíno is out for the year. Actually, on Tuesday night, the Atlanta fans were so frustrated they were chanting, "We want Kimbrel."
Wow.
As their bullpen melted down. Because Craig Kimbrell's still out there.
Yeah. All right.
Look, he was shaky the back half of last year, but I guess, to me, I believe it's just a hiccup in a very good career. I'd sign him. I don't know what the holdup is. I think part of it is the analytics crowd, and I'm an analytics guy, but I also know a great picture when I see it, and Craig Kimbrell's a great reliever.
All right, well, hear Andrew talk football from 10 to 1 every day, as you probably know, on Orange and Blue 760. Next time we're up on this, we'll be doing a little baseball here on After Hours.